Yeah, no, thank you very much. And I'm, for one, really looking forward to what has come out of these breakout sessions. So in that sense, good timing, because actually this whole summit, this whole get-together that you have had and are still having really comes at a very interesting point in time. And I'm not just saying that because it's also the day in a few hours there will be the quarterfinals of the Champions League that will be played. I also don't talk about that very gladly because my team, which is the team of this city, is no longer playing, and my wife's German team is still playing. So it's an excellent day to talk about CCS in that sense. No, the timing is right, and I start with football because actually it's a bit like that with the European Green Deal. So Europe's pathway to climate neutrality, it's halftime on the European Green Deal. So we played the first half and achieved quite some remarkable results, I think, with a climate framework with clear emission reduction targets by 2030, 2050, and sectoral rules to underpin them for action. And lots of industries actually say that that climate framework gives a lot of predictability, which is then a good thing. But halftime means that there's a second half to play, and that second half will have a very different focus politically in Brussels. Everybody knows what's happening in the world, also geopolitical competition for key technologies. So the second half will focus far more on actually the enabling framework for industry to come along in this transition, simplification, removing obstacles to actually reach those targets. So there will be a big industrial flavor to the second half, because obviously we are also working for politicians and are interested that industry switches with us in a transition, but doesn't switch off because of it. And CCS, carbon capture and storage, but also the utilization technology part, are really politically now an important part of that equation. And I'm personally very happy that we delivered on one more goal in that first half, which is the industrial carbon management strategy, which we presented in February, which is more or less really a roadmap on first actions to take to get this technology deployed and off the ground across Europe. Now, I know, and I'm realistic, that Commission papers tend to only be read by people who are paid for it to read it. But what is important about that paper, and why it's so good, I think, that it came out, is because it shows that Europe has jumped off the fence and is moving into the carbon capture and storage space and wants to be a leader in that field too. I think that's the real important thing about it. And I think that to talk a bit, just a little touch of politics before I briefly touch where the work is going with that. There's a very important political message in that strategy paper, in that carbon management strategy, and that sentence is that CCS is a legitimate part of the solution space in the transition to climate neutrality. Because, to be honest, you can jump low or high, but there will be parts of the economy that you cannot electrify. And there will be very complicated, big industrial plants that you cannot fully have operate on green hydrogen or hydrogen, because otherwise you have to take the whole plant apart. So you need CCS as part of the solution. And coming out with the message that is the case, I think, is really important if you want to showcase leadership. So it is an essential part to get to climate neutrality. We will double down on that ambition to have CCS in our solution space, and that's exactly why we're also here, because this commission will want to be the ambassador a bit of this technology from the European side. And I think we have a very good basis to stand on. It's very different this time than when we spoke first decades ago about CCS. Then it was still a bit science fiction, something being demonstrated, but now it's a reality show. It is really happening. So the first, as you know far better than me, the first storage sites in Europe are open for business. The first companies, industrial plants, have signed the contracts to transport CO2, and a company like Yara at Sluiskil in Zeeuws-Vlaanderen has actually put the spades in the ground to have the infrastructure to liquefy the CO2, to store it, and then to transport it to Northern Lights. And Porthos and Aramis are also going ahead. So that is really good. So there's really momentum, and it becomes so far easier to push for something together with you if something is actually really happening. And then briefly on where the work will take us. I think that there are many things that I can highlight, but one has to make a choice. But if I would make a choice now, it would be 3 Bs: to believe in the technology, to bring people together in a community to get it off the ground, and obviously I won't treat it as an elephant in the room, to bridge the finance gap. I will obviously also touch upon that. So to believe in the technology, I started by saying that in February we came out with the message that politically that we want to see this as a legitimate part of our technology mix, and we want to be a leader in this, but we have still a bit of a paradox here, because not all EU countries have included CCS as part of their solution space, and that will be quite a big conundrum that we will try to fix together with you. And things are changing. You know that Germany has now a CCS strategy, then Germany now is following on the heels, and the Netherlands, Denmark, all these other countries that you know already have this. And what we have done is there's every 5 years a cycle that we have at each country in Europe on national energy and climate plans. So what are you planning to do to reach the European goals? And we've invited very explicitly all 27 EU countries to look at: do you have storage potential of CO2 on your territory? Do you have use cases for it? And can you map the market potential, and can you work on public acceptance of the technology? Now, any person who's living next to an industrial site that comes from the days where environmental standards weren't that high naturally asks questions on any technology that prolongs the life on the industrial site. But, ladies and gentlemen, you know that just as well as me, CCS is not the enemy here. CCS is actually part of the solution to bring that industry site where you live next to into a better future. So that open invitation is now out with the EU member states. That fishing net has been cast, and by June we will get the national energy and climate plans back, and then of course we hope that more EU countries have decided to move the needle with us. Then on bringing people together, I'm always very inspired by what people, many of you represent businesses, and you're now sitting in a conference room listening to somebody on stage in a suit, but the businesses that you represent are really already clustering to use CCS, and I think that's important, because if you want to get let's face it, it's not an easy investment decision to invest in CCS, and the more you can do if you're an industrial site that has another industrial site next to you, the more you can do together in terms of having transporting the CO2 to only one of these industrial plants, to store it there and then to transport it. That helps so much in that business case, and we in Europe will do our best to help in that exercise. Because that's also what the European Union is about on this community thought. One element that we're trying to now bang our heads on together as well is to bring in also the end customer already, to start now thinking about, could we really live in a world where a big investment like a CCS can also partially be earned back, because the low carbon product at our supermarket shelf, for instance, is labeled as such, and people value that sustainability. So we are now thinking, do we need more of these pull factors on the demand side? I think that is something that the next Commission should really also pick up on, because if you really would succeed in having, for instance, beer on the supermarket shelf that is marketed as low carbon because part of it comes from fertilizers that have been produced by using CCS, it could be an opportunity to actually earn some of that investment back. And then finally, on bridging the finance gap, I tuned in yesterday online in one of your stakeholder dialogues, and I thought that was a really good one, because the one that I tuned into was really one where people from government shared ideas on how they use financial instruments to share the risk of this investment. We all know that a business only invests when it sees ultimately a business case, and that risk is never good for any commercial case. And they're looking at energy cost, they're looking at the ETS price, so the CO2 price that our emissions trading system has put on emissions. And we heard ideas like some countries are hedging the risk of the ETS price, some countries are hedging the risk of the energy cost. And that type of stuff we need now, that people think about this, because this is exactly the discussion, and people aren't, I think, not justifiably so, not everybody follows what's happening in Brussels in the summit places, but European leaders will tomorrow discuss the competitiveness of the green economy in Europe going forward, and exactly this, how can we use at the European level as well innovative financial instruments to share the risk of big projects in long-term technologies that we need. That is a discussion that is now being had at the highest political level. So all that work that was yesterday done in sharing the knowledge with each other, please also really don't be a stranger. Our doors are also open. Please come to us and inspire us with that kind of thinking. Because coming back to football, it's a team sport, and this will also be a team sport. That governments need to also help you, businesses, in doing this. So we want to be on your CCS team. Thanks.
Thanks very much for those remarks, Daniel. I want to start with the industrial carbon management strategy. Now, the Commission has been supporting CCS, CCUS for a number of years, particularly after the net zero target has been enacted. And for example, through the Innovation Fund, there's funding mechanisms in place, et cetera, et cetera. Industrial carbon management strategy, why now and what's the importance? I think you alluded to it in your comments. You said that this shows the Commission jumping off the fence. I noted you mentioned it sort of legitimizing CCS. Why do you think what was the underlying need to come out with it at this point in time, in your view?
Yeah, like really the momentum, because as in many things in life, momentum is anything. When you try to make a joke, it's also about about your timing. And this was just, I think, the right timing to come out with something more comprehensive on CCS. It is because storage sites have been opened up for business, and industries are moving there. And to be honest, it's also now the phase after this first half where industry is banging their heads on how do I actually achieve all these targets that have been set, and then naturally you end up in exactly this type of discussion. Like I can't like an IKEA box start taking my industrial plant apart because I can't use green energy for the full of it. So that momentum was really what drove it, and I think that if you want to show leadership and jump off that fence, only with milestones can you ensure where you are. So that is what the carbon management strategy has tried to do, to set some first milestones on the way on the European framework to make it happen. I'm pretty sure that more things will come our way based on developments, but that's really the reason why.
Thank you. And this morning in our first panel, we were discussing policy and project developments around the world, and it was highlighted that we need to kind of scale up, get more FID, projects need to be completed sooner, and we need supportive policies, which the Commission is putting into place. But I think from the Commission's point of view, how do you ensure that there's enough this sense of urgency and needing to put in place supportive policies and frameworks, that is, for example, through the industrial carbon management strategy, at the same time doing enough due diligence, working with consultation with the industry? How do you balance the need for urgency with doing the kind of the work, so to speak, to make sure that those are the right policies?
Yeah, and indeed, this is why these first projects are also so important. Northern Lights, Portals, Aramis, which will go to an investment decision hopefully next year as well. And to be honest, those projects must succeed because you need that success in order to start planning for the long term. So we're really also from our side in close contact with the companies around them. And then indeed you need to see what are still a bit of the bottlenecks that are there. At a certain point there was also a need for a bilateral talk between my boss and the Norwegian minister on finding the way to allocate the CO2, so to say, to store it, and we were pragmatic there. And the urgency is, I think, clear. The first steps that we have in the carbon management strategy, just to give you an example, once more EU countries have hopefully moved the needle on having it and mapping their storage potential. We want to, at the European level, help companies with a storage atlas, so to say, so really a map of Europe, like these are the storage sites, and then an atlas where investments are taking place, so people can see, if I group myself there a bit, I can come along. But we will find bottlenecks, and it will be always the case that people will only embrace this technology if they trust it. And that's why it will remain important to have the integrity in place. I think that the next moment that will be very important will be 2026, when we will, well, not me personally, but like where the climate department, together with Parliament and Council, will revise and review the climate framework that we put in place. And that is, I think, the moment where we have to have hopefully an inventory of the obstacles in our framework, because there will be obstacles. We have already had the first examples where the literal text of an ETS directive was actually not so ideal to actually make these investments happen. So that's also already an invitation to the companies who are involved in this. Help us with that inventory, because only then can we have the framework that does it both. That has the integrity, but also has the inner mental state of stability on making this happen.
Thank you. In your comments, you also mentioned, for example, that a number of countries already have carbon management in their national energy and climate plans and ECPs, and a call out to have more countries. We're starting to observe individual countries within the EU come out with their climate and CCS, well, in addition to climate, their own sort of carbon management strategies. Case in point, for example, most recently Germany. How important is to have an alignment between the individual sort of carbon management countries within Europe, and what is, if anything, the Commission is doing to bring about that alignment?
Yeah, no, like it is obviously essential, because scale matters, and scale ideally you build at the European level. So I think that the German move is a very good one, and indeed I hope that more countries will start having it in their planning for the transition. And then hopefully we can get to these atlases that I mentioned with the storage sites across Europe, to give a bit more transparency on that. And then one can have a discussion on, like, do we need further steps to start coordinating how this is working out in the different member states. We have already offered in the carbon management strategy that when enough countries are moving the needle, that there would also be a European coordinator, so really a person with a Rolodex who can help do some of the bottlenecks. Permitting will be one of them, and that you need careful planning across Europe for. We have, as you know, put these quicker deadlines for permitting in the Net Zero Industry Act, so CCS is a strategic net zero industry, can benefit from it, but it stands and falls with the civil servants on the ground, declaring paperwork complete and actually starting with the deadline. And that ideally you have a bit of a coordination at a certain point when enough member states are moving the needle.
And through the day we've heard sort of a lot of interest and investments from various different private sector organizations, from companies that are there moving up the carbon management sort of deployment. Are you encouraged by kind of the private sector response within Europe? And do you see sort of opportunities, well, rather, what opportunities, concerns are you hearing from them?
Yeah. No, obviously, as I said, we had already decades ago a little, it was tiny, a department in the Commission that worked on CCS, but then that was a bit of a, ultimately a mission incomplete because people was like, but this is just science fiction. So these first projects, that is the encouraging sign that we need, that it's happening, and that actually also have the first customers like Yara actually pledging to capture the CO2 and bringing it over there. So that all of that is encouraging, and obviously people, it should be really at the heart of our conversation. We need these investment decisions, and that is just the case. And I am personally also fully aware of some of the uncertainties out there on the energy cost, on the CO2 price, on the interplay with also this carbon border adjustment that we have. All of that, of course, needs to work out in order to make that investment bankable. And that's why we need to, I'm at this stage still optimistic together with the stakeholders, but we need to be vigilant. And that's why I said these financial instruments, that conversation is so important. If, because of some of the uncertainty, you just say, yeah, investment decisions will not be taken, then we need to have that conversation. Can we do a smart combination of public money, private money? Sometimes it's not even out-of-pocket money that you need. You just need a bit of a hedging system for different prices with some public guarantees. We need to be very vigilant on that. So once we get the signal that that is needed, then the discussion will be had. And as I said, the European leaders will have that discussion tomorrow as well.
And for my final question, I want to take us a little bit out of Europe and look at the world. And we discussed earlier in the morning developments overseas in the US, for example, in Canada, but also in places like in Japan or Southeast Asia. We're starting to see different carbon management, both projects, but also supportive policies, and some similar policies to Europe. Others are sort of in some ways different policies being implemented. Having worked also in competition, looking at this as a both, I suppose, a co-petition, sort of competition and collaboration. Do you see opportunities for synergies? Are there things that personally, sort of, for example, excite you about some of the policies that are around that Europe can learn from? What do you, when you look at the world, what do you see in terms of opportunity for co-petition?
Yeah, no, and absolutely, it's also a global institute for a reason, right? And Europe is so good in like staring at our own stomachs, and then and the rest of the world is obviously matters. This is a global challenge, and there's of course like lots of talk about the US with the Inflation Reduction Act. I am always of the school. Competition is a good thing because it sharpens your mind. And the US, let's face it, the US has put in a battle, a challenge to Europe with this. There's been a bit of a catalytic thing, that US Inflation Reduction Act. Now, Europe has certain strengths and weaknesses. US has certain strengths and weaknesses, like a tax reduction, of course, only works when you have the certainty that the tax reduction will stay. In Europe, we have the predictable framework, but we're not so good in having that really clear mobilization of the firepower. So I think it's good that the US has moved so assertively into that green technology space, because it makes us more assertive too. It, for instance, triggered the discussion that we just had on, which financial instruments can we use in a smart way, knowing that it's always a bit difficult political discussion, finance at the European level. So that's why I really see consensus emerging between those countries who don't want to up the European budget too much and those countries that want to do that as much as they can. I see consensus emerging for this mix of public and private money to still have the good answer to this. So it's both inspiration and thank you for the challenge, Washington.
And thank you for being here. It was great to have you. Thank you. And I would like to ask for an applause for Daniel. Thank you, Daniel.